Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are. Welcome to this report on cluster munitions. I'm calling it a conscientious case for clusters. And that's because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what these are and how the Ukrainians intend to use them. And so before anybody starts making judgments, just think about a couple of things here first. If, like me, you consider Colonel Alexander Vindman to be an American hero who stood up to anti American, anti democratic forces at work in the United States at a time that it was most needed and saw his career sacrificed for it, um, I can't think of a gentleman on the planet I have more respect for than Alexander Vindman. And I think you should too. Uh, he supports this notion and gave a great interview in on CNN, and I'd encourage you to check it out. The long and the short of it, as Colonel Vindman explains, is that the Ukrainians are out of 155 millimeter shells, or running out anyway. And American production capacity plus European production capacity cannot keep up with the rate at which those shells are being deployed. We have 3.5 million rounds of these things. Well, I shouldn't say that because we've got 3.5 million in total. Most of those are in 155 millimeter shells, but we've also got rockets that can be fired out of HIMARS. So these weapons fit the systems that the Ukrainians have and are short on ammunition for. This is a critical point to understand. Then there's the reality of the cost savings to the American people. We don't use these munitions in armed conflict anymore. There's been a lot of talk about the banning of these weapons. They're not really banned. There's a convention that prohibits their manufacture and export that 128 countries have signed. The United States is not one of those countries. Neither is Russia. Neither is Ukraine. And so there's there's a legitimacy there to the use of these munitions. There's a cost savings to the American taxpayer because just the storage of them or the decommissioning of them will cost us tens of millions of dollars, and it costs almost nothing to send them to the Ukrainians who need them. If we take a look over here, for those of you that know Bo, the fifth column, he did a great piece on this where he explained how these munitions work. And basically, what you got is you got a big bomb, and then inside of that, you got a bunch of little bombs. And these bunch of little bombs scatter over the target. These are great for the kinds of situations the Ukrainians find themselves in today. If you've got concentrations of light armored vehicles, these will do a good job against them. Troops in the open, which is the way that the Donbass and southern Ukraine is. It's open fields mostly. So you got troops in the open. These are very effective. One of the things that Bo did not mention, but that was mentioned by Elias Tobias, or I'm sorry, Tobias Elwood from the UK Ministry of Defense, is that the Ukrainians will be able to effectively use these munitions against minefields. The Russians have mined something like 20,000 square miles of Ukraine, poisoned the land with unexploded ordnance that will be in the ground for years to come. Not with these things dropped on top of them. These things will clear a path so that the maneuverable part of the mechanized brigades will be able to maneuver and move forward. This is a critical thing to understand. So, now, why is everybody so concerned about these things? Well, my understanding is that when you got all these little bombs inside a big bomb, some of them don't go off and they sit around for years, just like a landmine. But General Jack Keane, a British general, talks about this at some length. Manufacturing is important here, folks. And he says that US cluster bombs have a dud rate, that is, they leave unexploded ordnance on the field at a rate of about 1 to 3%, small number, as opposed to Russian cluster munitions that leave unexploded ordnance on the field at a rate of 30 to 40%, far more dangerous. General Keane goes on to make the point that the Russians have been using these weapons, and that's backed up by Tobias Elwood, who says that not only have the Russians been using them in Ukraine, so they have no right to complain, but they've been using them against civilian targets, which the Ukrainians will not be doing. The Ukrainians will be using them to clear minefields, use them over troops and troop equipment, and to clear out trenches. And this is important because now the Russians are mining and booby trapping the trenches so that as they get driven out of them, these traps are left behind for the Ukrainians coming in. We just lost a squad of Ukrainians to that kind of a booby trap uh, up north around Kramatorsk last night. Now, all of that says to me, the Ukrainians are going to use these on their sovereign territory against an oppressive invading force. They're going to use them where the ground is already mined, already poisoned with unexploded munitions, to do a lot of good in terms of getting rid of what's there already. They're not going to use them on civilians because they don't want to kill their own people. And they're running out of arms. A representative, I saw another interview with one of the representatives of President Biden's, who said that the decision to share these weapons with the Ukrainians was undertaken after after we got to a point where we couldn't keep up with the shell production. And it's either let the Ukrainians run out of shells or pony up these clusters. And so that's what we're doing. So the Ukrainians have every right. They have, in fact, a moral imperative to defend themselves. And not just to defend themselves, to free the Ukrainians that are currently living under the nightmare of Russian occupation. Let me introduce you to Irina Gubvera, who went missing on June 30th. She was 12. Her body was found last night. Before you judge the Ukrainians and the Americans too harshly for this, I ask you all, what would you do to protect your little girl? Thank you, my friends.